He had nothing, no home, no wealth, not even a place to rest his head. Society looked at him as invisible, just another black man surviving on the edge. But fate has a way of turning the overlooked into the unforgettable. One night, his path crossed with a billionaire's desperate cry for help. What happened next not only shocked the wealthy man, but also shattered everything people thought they knew about worth, race, and humanity. The question is, are you ready to hear the truth? By day, he blended into the background of the city, a man most people passed without a second glance. His clothes were worn, his hands calloused, and yet behind the tired eyes of this homeless black man was a quiet strength, a resilience carved by years of struggle. He spent his mornings searching for odd jobs, his afternoons looking for food, and his nights under the cold weight of the streets. To strangers, he was just another shadow in a world too busy to care. But what few realized was how deeply he noticed the world around him. Every broken glance, every act of kindness withheld, every reminder that society had already judged him before he could speak. He carried it all. He wasn't bitter, but the scars of injustice marked him as clearly as the weathered lines on his face. That night seemed like any other. The streets buzzed faintly with traffic, neon lights flickered across shop windows, and the city carried on as if his existence didn't matter. Yet something unusual was about to unfold, something that would turn his invisibility into undeniable power. For in just a few moments, the cries of one of the richest men in the city would collide with the silence of the man no one saw coming. The city at night had always been a test of survival. For a homeless man like him, every alley carried risk, every corner demanded caution. He'd learned to move quietly, to avoid trouble, to become almost invisible. But invisibility only works until fate decides to put a spotlight on you. And that spotlight came in the form of a sound he'd never expected to hear, a billionaire's cry for help echoing through the night. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. Wealthy men lived in glass towers far above his world, far from the cold sidewalks and unforgiving stares. Yet the sound came again, urgent, trembling, unmistakably human. Following it, he turned a corner and saw something that made him freeze. A luxury car, sleek and spotless, stood awkwardly against the curb. Its door was ajar, and beside it, a man in an expensive suit clutched his chest, gasping for air. The billionaire was pale, sweating, and alone. Not a bodyguard in sight, not a chauffeur to whisk him away. Just a man stripped of power in the most vulnerable way possible. For a moment, the homeless man hesitated. He knew too well how people like this had treated him. Cold eyes, tight grips on wallets, whispered judgments. To help would mean stepping into the gaze of someone who might never see him as human. But he also knew something else. Ignoring the cry wasn't his nature. He moved closer, cautiously, announcing himself so he wouldn't startle the man. Yet the look he received was one he recognized all too well. Fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of him. The billionaire's eyes widened, scanning his ragged clothes, his dark skin, his presence in a place where people like him were rarely welcomed. It wasn't gratitude the man showed. It was suspicion, the kind that cuts deeper than any insult. Still, the homeless man steadied his voice and offered help. He had nothing but the knowledge he'd picked up from watching, from surviving. He'd seen heart attacks before on the streets, had watched ambulances arrive too late for others who had been ignored. Instinct kicked in. He told the billionaire to sit, to breathe slowly, to loosen his tie. The billionaire obeyed reluctantly, torn between desperation and prejudice. But the situation didn't end there. Just as the homeless man was guiding him through the panic, headlights cut across the street. A patrol car slowed, then stopped. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes narrowing immediately. Not at the billionaire slumped by the car, but at the homeless black man crouched beside him. To them, it looked like an attack. The first shout came sharp. Step away from him. Hands where we can see them. The billionaire tried to speak, his words weak and broken, but the officers weren't listening. Their hands hovered near their weapons, eyes fixed on the figure they'd already judged. For the homeless man, time seemed to split. If he moved too quickly, they might fire. If he stayed too close, they might think he was holding the billionaire hostage. His heart pounded as he raised his hands slowly, voice trembling as he tried to explain. But explanations don't carry weight when your skin has already been criminalized. The billionaire, gasping, finally managed to croak out words. "He's helping me." Yet the officers hesitated, suspicion still thick in the air. Seconds stretched into unbearable silence, the kind that could shatter a life in an instant. And in that silence, the homeless man realized something chilling. He wasn't just fighting for the billionaire's survival. He was fighting for his own. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and his story could end right there on the pavement, written off as another incident. But he didn't stop. He didn't let the fear break him. Keeping his hands visible, his voice calm, he continued guiding the billionaire through each breath, each second closer to stability. The man's breathing steadied, his color slowly returning, while the officers exchanged uneasy glances. The tension refused to leave. Even as the ambulance sirens grew louder in the distance, the officers kept their eyes locked on him, as if waiting for confirmation that their suspicions were right. He stood in that fragile space between heroism and tragedy, his life balanced on the perception of men who couldn't see past the skin he was born into. And when the paramedics finally arrived, rushing to the billionaire's side, another wave of silence followed. Would the truth finally be seen? Would the word of a man with nothing outweigh the bias that already painted him guilty? The answer was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. The night was far from over, and what came next would define not just his story, but the billionaire's as well. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the street, painting the scene in chaos. The billionaire sat slumped against his car, his breathing shallow but improving, while the paramedics rushed to stabilize him. Yet the focus of the officers hadn't shifted. Their eyes stayed locked on the homeless black man, their suspicion radiating louder than any siren. One officer stepped closer, hand tight on his holster. The command cut through the night. "On your knees, now!" The man froze. He had done nothing wrong, but in that instant, he knew innocence didn't guarantee safety. He had seen the headlines, lived the fear, heard the stories whispered in shelters of men who never made a home after encounters like this. His pulse thundered in his ears as his knees hit the pavement, the cold concrete biting into his skin. The billionaire tried to speak, pointing weakly toward his rescuer. "He saved me." His voice cracked, lost under the weight of authority that wasn't listening. The officers barely glanced his way. In their eyes, the roles were already assigned, one victim, one suspect. Phones appeared in the distance, bystanders capturing every second, their voices tense, some pleading with the officers to stop. But history had taught the homeless man not to rely on witnesses, not to trust that cameras alone could protect him. Too often, the footage showed the truth too late, when lives were already lost. The officer's hand twitched against his weapon, a gesture that tightened the air like a noose. The homeless man raised his hands higher, voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I was helping him. That's all." His words echoed, fragile against a wall of disbelief. And then came the cruelest twist. One of the paramedics turned, confirming loudly, if it weren't for him, this man might not have made it. The truth was laid bare, undeniable. Yet the officers still hesitated, suspicion lingering, as though saving a billionaire's life couldn't erase the fact of his skin color, his poverty, his homelessness. In that moment, he realized the depth of the injustice. To survive, he had to prove more than his innocence. He had to prove his humanity. His act of heroism wasn't enough. It had to be vouched for, validated, defended by others with more power, more credibility in a system that had already marked him. The crowd's voices grew louder, angrier. Let him go. He saved him. The tension built into a storm, the kind that could break at any second. For the homeless man, each breath felt like a gamble. Would this be the night his life ended? Written off as a misunderstanding? Or would it be the night someone finally listened? The billionaire, weak but determined, forced himself to stand, leaning heavily on the paramedics. His voice cracked, but it carried. "You're pointing guns at the wrong man. He's the reason I'm alive." The crowd erupted, cameras flashing, every second immortalized. And for the first time, the officers faltered, the weight of witnesses, The billionaire's words, the undeniable truth pressed against their authority. Slowly, the tension loosened, but the fear didn't fade. The homeless man stayed kneeling, the cold still biting, his body trembling with the knowledge that his life had hung by a thread. One more second, one wrong move, and his story could have ended in silence. This was the breaking point. Not just a night of survival, but a confrontation with reality millions knew too well. In a world scarred by racism, even heroism could be mistaken for guilt. And as the billionaire's words echoed, one question lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. How many others had not been so lucky? When the chaos finally settled, the billionaire was taken into the ambulance, his life no longer hanging in the balance. The homeless man remained behind, his body tense, his mind reeling from what had just unfolded. He had saved a life, yet nearly lost his own in the process. Not because of his actions, but because of the way the world saw him. To the officers, he wasn't a hero. He was a threat, and that truth cut deeper than any wound. The billionaire, shaken and humbled, later spoke publicly about the man who saved him. He called him courageous, selfless, even heroic. For a brief moment, the spotlight shifted. Cameras captured the story. Headlines praised the unlikely savior, and people online shared his name as though they had always cared. But beneath the surface of applause lingered a harder reality. Why had his humanity been questioned in the first place? Why had his skin color and poverty nearly erased his act of heroism? For the homeless man, the attention was fleeting. He didn't want fame, he wanted dignity. He wanted a world where a black man kneeling on the street wasn't automatically seen as dangerous, where saving a life didn't have to be proven over and over, people unwilling to believe it. He knew that while his story made the news, thousands of others never would. Thousands of others had suffered the same suspicion, the same injustice, without witnesses or billionaires to validate their worth. And that is the weight of the story. It is not just about a man who stepped in when no one else did. It is about the broken lens through which society views race and poverty. A lens that almost cost him his life. A lens that continues to distort the truth for millions of people every single day. He walked away that night alive, but not untouched. The memory of those flashing lights, of hands near weapons, of the silence heavy with danger, it would stay with him forever. He carried not just the scars of homelessness, but the reminder that in this world, being black often means being seen as guilty before being seen as human. And so the question lingers. How many more lives must be threatened? How many more voices silenced before the world stops confusing skin color with suspicion? How many more heroes will be overlooked, dismissed, or endangered because of the simple fact of who they are? This story is more than one man's survival. It is a reflection of us all, of a society that still struggles to see people for their humanity first, of a world that needs to change, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Because until that change comes, no act of courage, no life-saving moment will ever be safe from the shadow of racism. So I leave you with this. If one homeless man could find the strength to save a billionaire's life despite everything stacked against him, what strength do we have to save each other from the injustice that still divides us?